versus commercial nuclear power. So the first energy source is before fossil fuels. And that energy source was what? It was sun and wind. The sun created photosynthesis to create our entire food chain, and it created pure water from ocean water, in which the wind carried it to the land and enabled the plants to grow. And with the sun and the wind, we were able to support beasts of burden for work and our own selves. So here you see a photograph of the people that settled the Western United States in their wagon trains with their oxen and horses. And it was just this energy source that enabled the Western United States west of Pittsburgh to be tamed. Just a second here, I have to get to the next one. Okay, the next energy source was this picture. By the way, can you see my pictures large on your screen or just a small? Okay, I'm not hearing you, Kathleen, but anyway.
They're large, you're in speaker view.
Okay, good. This is a photograph of the Comanche coal power station in Colorado. Notice how clean it is. The only things, for the most part, that are coming out of the stacks are water molecules and carbon dioxide molecules. This plant, this coal plant, of course, is a modern one. It has the most environmental controls on it. But the main thing about this is that fossil fuels created most of the nation. What it was, it built our cities, it built roads, it built railroads. Fossil fuels powered railroads, and they powered steamships. And they gave us hundreds of byproducts in all ways that we're very familiar with. And then, but the most important thing, what is the most important thing fossil fuels did for us? It enabled us to fight terrible enemies in World War I and World War II. If it wasn't for fossil fuels, we would be, us having fossil fuels, we'd be in a different state. So fossil fuels are by far the most important energy source so far. Now, the third energy source is military nuclear. And here you will recognize in this picture someone who's at the meeting, and that's the conning tower of the Trident nuclear submarine in Richland, Washington. And on the right is Wanda Munn, and on the left is another resident of Richland, Carol Darley, a wonderful professional photographer. And in the middle, these were taken in 2013, is a senior in high school from Augusta, Georgia, who worked with me for 4 years for public education about nuclear power. So I'm going to run through 3 or 4 slides on military nuclear power with a conclusion of this Navy, atomic powered Navy vessel. Was the first vessel to travel around the world following Magellan's journey underwater, and this vessel did it in 60 days, and Magellan did it in a couple of years. Of course, he didn't make it the whole way. This is the aircraft carrier Ronald Reagan, nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, and it was sent to Japan after the Fukushima or the Japanese earthquake and tidal wave to provide a tremendous amount of support for the Japanese people. It provided medical support, hospitals, food, mainly potable drinking water from the ocean, and of course helicopters to carry it all. Okay, that's the end of the military nuclear power. And those three sources, the oxen, wind and solar and horses, and our own power, fossil fuels and military nuclear power, have one thing in common. They all contributed tremendously to the United States, and they were all done without the control of an extremely in-your-face Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The next one goes to nuclear power, and I think you recognize this also. This is the Columbia nuclear power plant. And the thing to say briefly about this before we go to the concluding slide is that the nuclear power, the utilities, and all of the staff and the maintenance people have done an outstanding job for 40 years after they got their initial break-in the 70s and early 80s. And so commercial nuclear power has done a wonderful job, but it's very unfortunate. We are near the end of a road if we don't make some big changes. And I'd like to close with this slide of what we have to face. The good news is that nuclear power, commercial nuclear power, is least polluting, reliable, stable, has a very high capacity factor, has the highest energy density, it's environmentally friendly, good jobs, smallest waste volume, and easiest, this is new, my addition, easiest to design for sabotage, riots, and war. And by easiest, I mean it's easier than all the other energy sources to add features for that. Now, the most important thing for this meeting and for Ken Kok and you to think about is we have to face the longstanding problems. These are large, uncontrolled anti-nuclear activity from nonprofits, academics, students, media, and the vocal public. An irrational public fear of low-dose radiation, unrealistic radiation safety guidelines for linear, non-threshold hypothesis and collective dose. That requirement it stops nuclear and nuclear power and nuclear medicine very severely. The nuclear power today is unnecessarily expensive and has long delays in construction. There are no plans in the United States for a second generation of nuclear power. There are no plans to use 99% of the potential nuclear energy in used fuel and depleted uranium. No plans for reprocessing. Little support for other technologies besides light water reactors. There's no resolution of what to do with the radioactive waste. There are serious problems with the regulatory agencies, and nuclear power is subject to the whims of politicians. And the point of all of this, real briefly, is I think that it's very difficult for any section of the country to try to continue with nuclear power, except if we as a nation resolve these big problems. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ken Kok, who is going to give us his recommendations of what are some very important things that the Pacific Northwest and Hanford can do. Ken, it's over to you.
Okay. Thanks, John. He stole a little bit of my thunder, but I want you all to understand this idea is mine. It doesn't belong to anybody else, and I've had a lot of let's say, relatively negative reactions to the idea, but I still think it's worth looking at, especially for this area. Nuclear power is not growing in the U.S. There are 2 plants under construction in Georgia, One is supposed to be finished next year. The other one will follow shortly thereafter. But there are several others scheduled for decommissioning in the next 10 years. And given this environment, we got to look at why or how we can make a future for this technology in the area where it has somewhat grown up. We have PNL, we have Hanford, we have INEL, all played a major role in development of nuclear technologies, the nuclear fuel cycle, materials, reactors, fuel reprocessing, and waste handling technology. If we look to the future, as we look to the future, let's try to ignore the politics and focus on some opportunities. One thing I would like to make sure that you maybe make a note of, and that is a number or a relationship. From 1 gram of uranium, we can get 1 megawatt day. Or if you want to put it in other numbers, there are, we can get 24,000 kilowatt hours. If you convert that to electricity at about 33%, we can get 8,000 kilowatt hours of electricity out of every gram of uranium. And that's not just uranium-235, that's uranium-235, uranium-238, and uranium-233 that we can make from thorium. So the resource is large, and I'll throw some numbers at you later. There are several problems with nuclear status in the U.S. Spent fuel from operating and decommissioned nuclear reactors is a public concern. Over 90% of the fuel for U.S. reactors is purchased offshore. The U.S. have limited enrichment capacity at the Urenco facility in New Mexico. New capacity is in development. General Electric, working with some other companies, has looked at laser enrichment, and they're actually looking at building a plant. And there's also the possibility of an advanced centrifuge facility at the former enrichment plant in Piketon, Ohio. Licensing is the real problem. I had a developer come to the Tri-Cities about 4 years ago. He was willing to build a demonstration molten salt facility. We worked with Energy Northwest. There are 3 approved reactor sites around the area in Hanford, the FFTF site, and 2 other sites right next to the nuclear generating station up here. All that is fine. The problem is when you go to the NRC, they say, but it's going to take us 20 years to get a license for a new technology. That's ridiculous. You can't expect anybody to pay for development of something starting from nothing with non-government funds and get anywhere in developing anything if it's going to take 20 years. So licensing is a real problem. And what's happened is people are taking these technologies offshore. Bill Gates has funded some work with fast reactors. That's being done offshore. The folks that came here originally are now working in Indonesia because the environment is such that those people want to see development and they're willing to work for it. So licensing is absolutely in disarray. Even a small PWR, like the new scale facility that you hear about, a small modular reactor, is nothing but a pressurized water reactor. It's got some different features because it's small and safety and so forth can be handled differently. But they started back around 2010. They expect they may have an operating facility by 2029. That's incredible. We ought to be able to do something like that. Small nuclear plants are not new. The Big Rock Point facility in Michigan operated for over 30 years. It produced 60 megawatts of electricity. The only reason it was really abandoned by the utility was the land it was on was more valuable than the electricity it could produce. So licensing is a problem. Reactor fuel is a problem. As I said earlier, we do not have an indigenous supply of natural uranium that is sufficient to even supply what we already have. So we're buying stuff from Russia. Up until about this year, much of our enriched uranium, which is required for the light water reactors, was produced by downblending military highly enriched uranium. It wasn't done by enriching the basic thing. Spent fuel is a problem. We looked at permanent disposal at Yucca Mountain. That site essentially is dead. There is no alternative. So, looking at what the problems are, what are our opportunities? I think that is important to look at. We got to provide some carrots to make this thing happen. The thing that I've really looked at is we actually, if you look at the uranium that comes out of the mine, we extract less than 1% of the energy that's available from that material. Think of putting 10 gallons of gas in your car and driving it a tenth of a gallon's worth, and then dumping out the rest and then refilling your tank. That sounds ridiculous, but that's what we're doing with our uranium resource. If we use more, we don't have to mine it. If we use the right advanced technology, we don't have to enrich it. So there it is. There are approximately 70,000 metric tons of spent fuel available that's sitting in storage at various reactor sites around the country. In addition, we have 10 times that much or more, closer to 70, over 7,000, I'm sorry, I got the numbers wrong here. 775,000 metric tons of depleted uranium that has come from the enrichment process run by the government. The government considers this to be waste and wants to throw it away. Think of the number I gave you, 1 megawatt day per metric ton, and we got 775,000 metric tons of this stuff. It's like throwing energy down the garbage disposal. It's not worth it. So, what is my idea? We got space at the Hanford site. It's never going to be really open to the public. What if the state of Idaho, Oregon, and Washington gave clearance and said, let's create a interim storage facility at the Hanford site. But here are the conditions. If we want to do that, we want you to build all of the containers and everything in the Pacific Northwest. There's precedent for this. The containers that are used at WIP are built in Carlsbad, New Mexico. That was one of the deals for getting the Carlsbad site, was to provide some industrial base to build the containers and the special shipping trailers that are used for those big containers. There's no reason we couldn't propose the same thing. The other thing is the value, the energy value of that material. I've got some numbers in a paper I wrote and presented about 6 or 7 years ago. This spent fuel and depleted uranium have the equivalent value of, if you could produce electricity from them, have a value of exceeding $600 trillion, based on basically a cost to the consumer of just over about 10 cents per kilowatt hour. Okay? If you compare it to oil in the ground, the equivalent of the used fuel at 70,000 metric tons is basically 1 trillion barrels of petroleum. You multiply that basically by 10 to get 11 trillion barrels. I'm sorry, 11 trillion barrels of oil. I don't think even Saudi Arabia has that kind of energy resource left in the ground. And if the states had title to the fuel, in other words, they owned it, it could provide a financing basis to do a whole bunch of research to use it. And that is basically the idea that I have proposed. We have 2 reactor systems. The liquid metal breeders, the liquid metal cooled fast reactor is one that can use the spent fuel and the uranium with some reprocessing. The molten salt reactor has been shown that it can use tritium and produce use thorium and produce U-233. So we know the reactor systems that will work. The interesting thing, one of the interesting things is in the EBR2 program, when it was operational at INEL, they came up with a reprocessing process that is based on a something like zone refining. It was what it would be. It's a pyrometallurgical process. It's dry. There's no liquid waste. They have proposed a fuel cycle that would use about 700 tons of uranium, one time processed from spent fuel, could drive a 1,000 megawatt fast reactor for its lifetime. And we got a way to build 100 of those. The waste from the pyro process, because all the actinides and the long-lived stuff is kept in the reactor fuel. It's not a waste product. The waste product is only will decay to a level of natural uranium in 300 to 500 years. And we can build an engineered storage facility to store that waste. Its volume is relatively small. So my message to you is, we've got the place, we've got the transportation, we can ship by sea, by rail, or by highway. The Northwest has all kinds of advantages. We've got the technical capability within the two major DOE laboratories and others in this area to try to make use of the resources we have. Now, I'm not talking about something that's going to happen tomorrow. We've probably got a 20-year political fight to even get it started. But the only way we can do it is for you and I and others to start talking about it and getting the idea down. Because if the states have something sitting there that's worth $11 trillion, they're going to want to spend it. And the only way they can spend it is to use it. So that's my message. I'll answer any questions. I'll meet with you anytime, one-on-one at Starbucks or someplace over a cup of coffee and talk about it more. I think John is going to send Floyd some copies of my paper that I presented 8 years ago, and some written words about what I've said today. But I'm convinced that given the ability to beat the political system, that this is a technologically logical and easy problem to handle. There's nothing new. Thank you.
Ken, Floyd, Ivy, what is the status of the NuScale reactor in Utah, or for Utah at INL?
That basically is the NuScale system. And the idea is one where you would build a series of small reactors. If you think about the standard old coal-fired electrical generating station, it had 3 boilers, not one, it had 3. By putting multiple small systems together, you've got backup and reliability. Industrial processes require a reliability that people would like to see exceed 99%. They can't have something where the power goes up and down. They've got to have consistent, steady power. And that's true all over the world in places where they don't even have an electric grid yet. You got to start small someplace.
So I understand, John or Ken, that a new scale system was planned to be built in for use in Utah Power, and it would be at INL at the laboratory, but that the utility has decided not to proceed as of this time. Not to proceed. Somebody else may have other facts on that.
The simple the ultimate plant that they want to build in Utah will have 10 small 70 megawatt reactors. And they will be set so that you basically refuel and operate one each year. And you will have maybe 9 in operation and not 10, or 8 in operation and not 10. That's the small modular concept, and it's used to have that I grew up with in Western Michigan.
I think Wanda Munn has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. You may have more recent information than I, Floyd. As I understood, the last nuclear brief that I read indicated to me that one of the consortium of utilities that was backing the project had decided that they could not risk the possibility of increased cost factors once they're actually into active construction. They have, of course, I think the good news is that the NuScale managed to actually clear all of the hurdles at NRC very nicely. It took them a while, but they did it. And pulling together the consortium of funding was the most difficult part, as I understand it. And one of those utilities has indicated that they cannot continue to uphold that. But unless there is other factors involved that you know of that I haven't actually seen, it's my understanding that the only reason the project is on hold right now is that they're going to have some meeting of the minds with respect to funding before they can go further. Mike, have you heard anything to the contrary?
I have not, Wanda. In fact, I haven't been at Energy Northwest for about eight months now, but when I left, they had very high hopes to, if not field the second SMR in the nation after UAMPS, to possibly even field the first one. After all, UAMPS still has to do site permitting and so forth. We have a site right next to Columbia out there that's already permitted and ready to go, which jumps them ahead in the process at least 2 years.
Oh,
So I hadn't heard about the funding issue.
No, well, I'm speaking from only the last nuclear brief that I read, but I'm so pleased that NuScale has been as successful as they have in completing all of the hoops and actually getting the go-ahead from NRC. That's kind of a red flag we haven't had in a long time. And I don't think that the funding issue is probably insurmountable. You can understand why utilities are as conservative as they are with respect to how much they can actually commit to input for new reactors, given the history that we've had in the past, the successful projects that have been launched by many organizations, having been recognized for 40 years now, that the best way to slow down any project is to litigate it. And we've had plenty of history there. So I guess I still remain very hopeful. I think NuScale is going to be able to move forward, but it's going to take a little bit more. We're going to have to regroup with respect to the funding issue from the single utility that I believe is pulled out. To my knowledge, the other consortium remains intact, but then these things happen very abruptly sometimes. So that's the best info I have.
Wanda, I'm just curious if it's not sensitive, but do you know which utility it is that pulled out?
It was one of the cities,
Okay.
one of the Utah cities. That,
Okay. The reason I asked is because that Utah city that pulled out is probably almost certainly associated with the UAMPS effort to build the site in Idaho. I have not heard of any such issues slowing down Energy Northwest's vision. And in fact, one of the long poles in the tent is getting subscriptions for the power. So that's 720 megawatts. And I think Energy Northwest could easily get a commitment for half of that if they sent out a request today. And UAMPS,
I think you're correct.
And UAMPS has for years, they've been looking for subscribers for at least 4 or 5 years, has been struggling to even get to that point. But I'm certain DOE, based on conversations they've had with Energy Northwest, I'm sure they would sign up immediately, as well as a number of the counties on this side of the Cascades.
Oh, I think so too. I don't think we'd have any problem in Eastern Washington.
Yeah.
But and as I said, this was a single member of the consortium. I am not sure that's a full stop.
Yeah, and I heard they had a percentage that they needed to get to, like I don't remember what it was, but let's say it's a 30 or 40% subscription. And so if they lost a single big utility, that would be a big showstopper for them.
Yeah, for the time being. But it's a fallback and regroup position, to the best of my knowledge.
What are the indicators that any place in the United States needs new power? And here in the Northwest, in March of 2018, the BPA gave a no-touch order to Energy Northwest. And in August 2020, again, a no-touch order, meaning, as I understand it, that if you turn any of your power down, there will not be anything to replace it.
Then you might just as well move to California. Yeah.
Yeah.
Governor
Don, do you have a question?
I think that we have to understand that licensing process is a thing that's really critical. And if a utility or an industrial group can plan to build something and have a fixed schedule that's not driven by somebody putting a wrong bolt somewhere and the NRC saying, whoa, stop, we got to inspect everything, and you're hung up for a year, you just can't, industrial company can't proceed on that basis. All you got to do is look at the licensing of the VIT plant. And, Congress wants to pass a funding to build a demonstration reactor at INEL. That's fine, but it's got to be licensed by the NRC. And the NRC, if there's not a fixed design with NQA specifications for every piece and part, you're going to have to wait until you get it. And that takes forever.
So I know that the matter of power, electricity, is something fundamental to our life. For me, born in 1940, and I know that it's still by the end of the 40s and early 50s, there was no electricity brought to our home by a power pole with a cable. So we had a wind tower that drove that charged 12-volt batteries. So we had enough electricity there for lights and some other things by our own green energy, our own wind power with batteries. And then the REA came through, the Rural Electrification Association came in and brought electricity to all of those rural areas in the United States. The REA increased the ability to live and the quality of life dramatically. So here we are at a time now when we've had 2 no-touch orders in the Northwest in 2018 and 2020. So the issue is now, if there is no new power established and the advancement to no fossil fuel, no carbon continues, what will be the results when the next no-touch event happens, meaning it's too hot in the summer or it's too cold in the winter and we don't have enough electricity? The result is going to be either blackouts or it's going to be orders to turn off heat and turn off the AC. So the question is how does the populace, the people that need that heat? See, I know that, for example, that we have here people here. Frank, I know, Frank likes it to be warm in the winter and cool in the summer. I know that. Kat is particularly interested in being just right in her temperature. She does not want to get too chilly or too hot, either way. And Wanda in particular is